There is one detail in the Brandon Lawson case that many people overlook, and that detail is not in the famous 911 call. It's in Kyle, his brother. Because if you look at this story from beginning to end, the mystery is not only in what Brandon said that night, but in the way the people who tried to help him understood something completely different from what might actually have been happening. And maybe, in that confusion, the only chance to understand the case in real time was lost. If you're not familiar with the story, let me summarize it first. Brandon Lawson was 26 years old, lived in San Angelo, Texas, worked in the oil field, and was the father of 4 children. On the night of August 8, 2013, he argued with his partner, Ledessa Lofton, and left home shortly before midnight. On the surface, it all began as a serious domestic fight and an impulsive departure. His plan seemed simple: drive to his father's house in Crowley, several hours away. It did not look like a sophisticated escape or a secret plan. It looked like the kind of messy decision someone makes after a bad night. Soon after, Brandon started calling. First, he tried to reach Ledessa several times, but she did not answer because she had left her phone charging in the car. At 12:38 a.m., he called Kyle and said he had run out of gas near Bronte on Highway 277. Kyle and his wife Audrey headed out with fuel to help him. At that point, the case still seemed clumsy, but salvageable. At least on the surface, it was the problem of an upset man stranded in the middle of the night, waiting for his brother to come get him out of trouble. But then came the call that turned the case into something else. At 12:50, Brandon called 911. The recording would become famous because it is confusing, full of noise, and for years was debated word by word. Even so, one thing is clear: Brandon did not ask for an ambulance. He asked for the police. He said he was in or near a field, and that something was happening with other people. That changes the whole scene, because he no longer sounds just like a man without gas. He sounds like someone frightened, distressed, or convinced that there was real danger around him. And this is where Kyle enters, and where the story becomes far more unsettling. While Brandon was talking to 911, he was also still speaking to his brother in broken calls. Kyle and Audrey reached the scene at around 1:10 in the morning, and almost at the same time, a sheriff's deputy arrived. Brandon's truck was there, partially on the road, but Brandon was gone. There was no visible damage to the vehicle. The keys were not inside. The phone wasn't either. And yet, in the middle of all that, Brandon still managed to communicate at times. In one of those calls, Kyle understood that he was in the field. Then Brandon said something even worse, that he was 10 minutes up the road and that he was bleeding. That detail is the heart of the case, because if Brandon was really injured, hiding, or running from something, then the question is no longer just why he disappeared. The question is why no one managed to correctly understand his situation in that moment. According to the family, Kyle believed Brandon was hiding from the deputy because he had an old arrest warrant, and if that is true, then the whole scene looks different. Brandon may have been genuinely asking for help, while Kyle interpreted it as him simply trying to avoid the police. The deputy saw an abandoned truck. Kyle heard his brother out in the field. Brandon, on the other end of the line, kept saying things that sounded worse and worse, but no one had the full picture. And that is where the detail many ignore appears. For years, public attention stayed fixed on the 911 recording, on whether he said this or that, on whether he was talking about men chasing him, a field, or something else. But the real blind spot may have been much closer. It was not only what Brandon was saying, but how Kyle was understanding it while trying to help him. If the family is right, that moment may have been key. Not out in the field or on the highway, but in that brutal difference between asking for help and seeming like you're only hiding. After that, the night began to fade out. The calls became harder to complete. By around 1:19, many were already going straight to voicemail. Kyle drove away for a bit, waited, went back to look for him, returned later with gas, and found nothing. The truck was towed that same morning. Officially, the Texas DPS summary remained brutally simple. Brandon called 911. Authorities found the truck and they were unable to find him. But that cold summary always left out the most human part of the case, that for crucial minutes, his own brother was there, talking to him, trying to understand, and failing. In the days that followed came the searches, then the dogs, the volunteers, the Texas Rangers, the theories, and the years of uncertainty. Part of the family held for a long time to the idea that another person may have been involved. Another part of the public debate pushed toward a harsher but very possible explanation that Brandon, probably under the effects of a meth relapse, suffered paranoia, disorientation, and wandered off on his own into the dark, hostile terrain surrounding the highway. That reading does not remove the horror of the case. If anything, for many people it makes it even crueler because it would mean Brandon really was in danger. Only the danger came from his own mental and physical state, not necessarily from a third party. The major turning point came almost 9 years later. In February 2022, a search group found clothing consistent with what Brandon had been wearing that night near the last known area. After that discovery, the Texas Rangers carried out a new search and located partial human remains in the area. In December 2024, the family announced that DNA testing confirmed those remains belonged to Brandon Lawson. That closed one basic question. Brandon had not started a new life. He had not left the country. He had not vanished without a trace. He died relatively close to where everything began. But that confirmation did not close the other question. The one that still matters most, exactly how he died and whether anyone else was involved. Officially, the case remains open within the unresolved files of Texas DPS, and that is why the detail about Kyle remains so important, because even after the remains were found, the case did not become a simple story. On the contrary, it became more bitter. Now we know that Brandon did not leave to start over. We know that he died. We know that he was close. But we also know there was one cursed hour in which he spoke to his brother, called 911, said he was bleeding, said he was in the field, and even so, no one could understand exactly what was happening. Maybe the mystery of Brandon Lawson is not only what happened on Highway 277, maybe it is how easy it is to lose the truth when, in the middle of fear, each person believes they are seeing a different story. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate your support with a like and a subscription. I upload videos frequently, covering mysterious and disturbing cases like this, and there are many more coming. So, stay tuned.